Order. Question number 11, the Honourable David Parker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Foreign Affairs. Did he approve officials' recommendation on 19 April 2012 to commence work on, quotes, finding an appropriate mechanism to meet Khalaf's concern for compensation, possibly through the joint venture? And was the $4 million payment to Khalaf the adopted mechanism, given Cabinet noted part of that payment was for the settlement of the long-running dispute?
The Honourable Murray McCully.
Mr Speaker, no, none of the 6 recommendations in the paper contain the quotation the member refers to.
Supplementary
question, the Honourable David Parker.
Why was no tender process run in respect of the first $4 million payment to Mr Khalaf?
The Honourable Murray McCully.
Mr Speaker, I'm advised by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs that the tender process is followed in relation to this matter, followed all of the public sector guidelines. As the member will be aware, the Auditor General is conducting an inquiry that will include the matters that he's referred to. The Government welcomes the inquiry as a means of resolving the questions that the member refers to.
Point of order, the Honourable David Parker.
I seek leave to table the tender documents, sir, which were in respect of the $6 million agri-hub, not the $4 million payment.
Have those documents not been tabled before?
I haven't tabled that one, sir.
I'll put the leave to table those particular tender documents. Is there any objection? There is none, they can be tabled.
Supplementary
question, the Honourable David Parker.
Does he agree with the Prime Minister that Cabinet's view was, quotes, there was a case the investor had put up that we may have to fight that in court, and there was probably a faster way of trying to resolve that, end quote? If so, why does he now say it's not about compensation when the Prime Minister admitted it was?
The Honourable Murray McCully.
All wise ministers agree with the Prime Minister.
Supplementary question, the Honourable David Parker.
Why did he repeatedly refer to avoiding litigation in this House in early answers to questions, saying the deal was needed to resolve that prospect, given his new view is that the payment wasn't compensation?
Speaker,
the Honourable Murray McCully.
Despite the member's attempts to distort the responses I've given on that question, that question is very fully answered by both the Cabinet paper I've tabled in this House and other responses to exactly that question.
Supplementary question, the Honourable David Parker.
If the CEO of a company paid off a businessman getting in the way of a deal, that would be a bribe. What's different in this case?
The Honourable Murray McCully.
Speaker, I'm well aware that the member chooses to adopt an uncharitable view of this matter, but I want to refer to the fact that the Auditor General is now inquiring into the very matters that he has raised in his question. The Government welcomes that inquiry as a basis for resolving this matter. Officials advise me that the decisions that have been made within the appropriation, lawful and in New Zealand's foreign policy interests, and that remains my position.
Supplementary question, the Honourable David Parker.
Is the Minister saying that a tender process was run in respect of the first $4 million payment to Mr Khalaf?
The Honourable Murray McCully.
Mr Speaker, I'm saying that the appropriate processes were followed, both in respect of the $6 million payment and the $4 million payment.
Question number 12,